Hello, Year 8. This is Mr. C here, and we're here to talk to you about the English Civil War, specifically sites associated with the English Civil War in London. And I start here in Trafalgar Square. Nelson's Column is just behind me there, and Whitehall is just down there. But what I am most interested in is the statue of the man on horseback behind me. That is Charles I, one of the key figures in our studies of the English Civil War. You'll notice he's standing, or indeed he's sitting on horseback, standing on a plinth, looking down Whitehall, looking down at the Houses of Parliament there with his beady eyes. He represents the Royalists. Those who supported the king were known as the Royalists. He came to power in 1625, and we'll go through, as we walk through, various different causes of the English Civil War, but he was one of the key causes of it. Then the lack of support that he had, and he alienated various different factions within it. But the English Civil War is all about the Royalists, represented by him, and Parliament, represented by somebody else. Actually, before we leave Charles I, I can't leave without telling you the significance of this place here. We're on a sort of traffic island, rather busy traffic island here, just by Trafalgar Square. This is known as Kilometre Zero. Essentially, all distances in the UK are measured from this point. So if you're ever on the motorway and it says 50 miles to London, it means 50 miles to this spot. Everything goes down here, and Charles I sits on top of it. And that person, of course, is Oliver Cromwell, who is just behind me here, just outside Westminster Hall, right here by the Houses of Parliament, just in Parliament Square. And his statue is there. He is representing Parliament, or as he would say, a more democracy, anti-royalist, puritanical point of view. Now, the parliamentarians were also known as the Roundheads for the helmets that they wore, and their firm belief was that we shouldn't be worshipping the king. The king should not be the most powerful person in the land. It should be Parliament representing the people. And Oliver Cromwell became the voice of that movement, and he led the parliamentary forces in the Civil War. Just before I go, again, somebody's playing a great trick on Oliver Cromwell. He stands there proud in the House of Parliament, but some royalists, just right across the road here, just above the church there, the St Mary's Church attached to Westminster Abbey, there is a little bust of Charles I, the man who Oliver Cromwell ordered to be executed. So in all eternity, in Parliament Square here, the two of them face each other, Charles I versus Oliver Cromwell. Now, there are many reasons and causes for the English Civil War. There were religious reasons. Oliver Cromwell and Parliament were more keen on a puritanical Protestant way of celebrating religion. Charles I was a bit more traditionalist, and of course he was married to a Catholic, Henrietta Maria, and so there were accusations of him being Catholic. There were other practical reasons. France was threatening in the south coast, and the Scots were rebelling, and Ireland as well, of course, was difficult to manage. But perhaps some of the most important reasons are economic reasons. Charles, in order to fight his wars and for his largesse, was putting taxes left, right and centre, putting one on ship money, putting it not only to the people who lived on the coast, but also people who lived inland. And I think the other point about economic is people are so annoyed with Charles I's ability and his predilection to spending on lavish things. And that's linked to where I'm walking right now. I'm walking along Birdcage Walk. I've got St James's Park there, and I've just got Westminster I'm walking towards now. Birdcage Walk is named because along these trees and along the road there would have been lots of different bird cages. And in the park there was a lovely menagerie, which is perhaps another name for a zoo. And what Charles I did, he had bought all these luxurious and tropical and exotic animals and birds, spent an awful lot of money on it, and would walk and amble along here. And many people saw this as a bit of a waste of money, really, considering he was putting taxes up on his people. So this is just an amazing example of Charles I's inability to sort of reason with his people. Lots of the most significant battles of the English Civil War took place quite far away from London, in Yorkshire with Marston Moor and Naseby close to the Midlands. But there are a few battle sites within London, and this memorial here is to one of those battles. It's the Battle of Brentford, out in Brentford near the River Thames. And this is an interesting battle. It took place in 1642, quite early on in the Civil War. It was actually a victory for the Royalists, a slightly rarer victory for the Royalists, certainly in the London area. King Charles had raised his standard in Nottingham and they'd marched his way down. And by November of 1642, they were approaching London. And they were going in that direction towards the centre of London, towards Parliament, presumably with the intention of taking it. Now, a few parliamentarians were here defending it. Sadly, they lost. However, they did put up such a huge resistance that the next day the Royalists went on a bit further to a place called Turnham Green, where they fought again, and the Royalists lost that battle. And many historians believe it was actually the delaying tactics that they faced here at Brentford. They were exhausted, and it gave time for the parliamentarians to rally their troops at Turnham Green. That led to them losing it. So actually, this is quite a significant battle site here. The other thing I think is really interesting is the Royalist commander here was a man called Prince Rupert of the Rhine, and he was very famously had a dog called Boy. And the propaganda going around at the time by the Royalists, by the parliamentarians even, was that Boy had magical powers and was this amazing dog that could win a battle for the parliamentarians. And indeed, he used to come to the battle sites, Boy, and he presumably was here on this site for the Battle of Brentford. Unfortunately, Boy died 2 years later at the Battle of Marston Moor. So he did die in battle, Prince Rupert's dog. But come along to Brentford and see probably one of the main battles, the main London battles of the English Civil War. Behind me is the Queen's Chapel of St James's Palace, and it was built in 1623, and it's quite integral to our studies of the English Civil War because it was built for Charles I's wife. Actually built for his first potential wife, the Spanish Infanta. That didn't work out for various different reasons. He then married Henrietta Maria, and this was her chapel, her church. The reason why that's significant is she was a Catholic. And many in the parliamentarian cause were very sceptical of Henrietta and her Catholicism. They felt that her Catholicism had too much influence over Charles and was going to therefore infiltrate into the church in England. And the puritanical approach that Oliver Cromwell and others had were very, very much against us. And she became a bit of a hate figure amongst them. It, of course, didn't help that she was French. But it was here, and then eventually, after the end of the Civil War and the death of Charles, his son, Charles II, he allowed his wife to move into here, and so in many ways it did come down to its real purpose. It's just facing St James's Palace, a bit of a slightly even older building. But the reason why this is significant is this is where Charles I spent his last night as a man who was essentially with his head still on, before he was marched down there towards Whitehall and Banqueting House, which we'll go to now. Behind me is Banqueting House, and on the 30th of January 1649, the English Civil War ended here. This is where Charles I, King of England, was executed. He was beheaded. There was some scaffolding and a plinth was put out here. Huge crowds. It would have looked quite a bit different from today here on Whitehall, but he was executed here. It was a very cold day. He decided not to wear a coat, probably because there was no point, but he did wear several layers of underclothes, sort of thick cotton, almost t-shirts as it were, to show that he wasn't shivering. He made a very profound speech, of which unfortunately nobody could hear because they were quite far away and he was muttering a little bit. But it's believed he said something on the line of, "I go from a corruptible to an incorruptible crown." He gave a symbol and he was killed, and his blood ran red, which caused a lot of shock because the belief at the time was that, of course, they were blue bloods, that the king's blood would be blue, but he was of red blood. Historians look at this in two different ways. Some people see this as the death of a innocent man, and those who supported the king believe that so. When it came to the Restoration, however, people felt that, okay, it was a bad thing we killed their king, but we took power away. And indeed, the monarch of Britain and England has never been as despotic and as powerful as Charles was. So perhaps this is a key moment in the formation of our democracy, where we took power away from the king, albeit in a very bloody fashion.